It is estimated that 1 in 5 American veterans from these wars suffer from severe depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. Retired Lieutenant Colonel John O'Brien is one of them. He served 4 tours in Iraq and the surrounding Persian Gulf, as well as 3 tours on the border of Israel and Egypt. He has been awarded the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and the Combat Action Badge, among other commendations. He joins me tonight to talk about his life. Also joining me, an extraordinary group of scientists: Mary Stein from the University of California, San Diego, Lisa Shin from Tufts University, Kerry Ressler from Emory University, JoAnn Difede from Cornell University, and once again, my co-host is Dr. Eric Kandel. He is a Nobel laureate, a professor at Columbia University, and a Howard Hughes medical investigator. I am pleased to have all of them here this evening at this table. And we begin, as we always do, with Dr. Eric Kandel. So what are we doing this evening?
We're doing post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a fascinating disorder, and it is unique in psychiatry. It is perhaps the only psychiatric disorder whose cause we really understand well. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a response to the physical threat to the integrity of oneself or someone else. It is associated with feeling of tremendous fear and helplessness. We're privileged to have John O'Brien with us today, who can tell us directly what it's like to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. As you pointed out, he's an American hero. He just retired from being lieutenant colonel in the Army and served 25 years of duty, including service in Iraq, where he first developed post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, as you pointed out, is not rare. It's also not a recent disorder. Estimates range from 15 to 25% of troops coming back from this current war suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Moreover, although it's only been recognized as a specific diagnostic category for about the last 30 years, post-traumatic stress disorder has been with us since people have been going to battle. The Trojan War, one of the earliest wars on record, where Homer described in the Iliad, took place probably 12,000 BC, and Homer wrote about it in 8,000 BC. There he describes how Achilles, terribly hurt by the death of his closest friend Pericleides by Hector, the leader of the Trojan troops, went on a rampage in which he started to kill people, found Hector, killed him, screaming, "Nothing matters to me now but killing, blood, and men in agony," tied Hector to his chariot and dragged him around Patroclus' grave 3 times. And Homer points out that you not only suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, which is not the name he used, suffer from this disorder if you are a victim of violence, but also a perpetrator of violence. And in fact, Achilles repeatedly had reminiscences of this and bad dreams about this afterwards. American troops have been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder since America existed. In the War of Independence, in the Civil War, World War I, World War II, all the subsequent wars. But it wasn't until the aftermath of the Vietnam War, because of the political unpopularity of the war, that this was considered a serious diagnostic category. And in 1980, the American Psychiatric Association officially designated it that. But in the early days, because the evidence for post-traumatic stress disorder comes from an individual report, people were skeptical about the reliability of it, thought this was a way of soldiers found to avoid going back to the front. They call this bad behavior. And as the New York Times, which, by the way, seems to be calling our programs each time, last time they did pain, now they're doing post-traumatic stress disorder. They must be watching what's happening on Charlie Rose.
They could do worse.
They could do a lot worse. So they pointed out that veterans from the Vietnam War suffer a double hurt. First of all, they have the disease, the post-traumatic stress disorder, but in addition, because many of them were thought to be malingerers, bad behavior, they did not get an honorable discharge. This is no longer the case. This is now considered a legitimate category, and people who suffer from it are treated appropriately. And one of the reasons it's a legitimate category is because, in addition to having a good clinical definition, we're beginning to have some biological markers of it. We know a little bit about the genetics. So we know from imaging experiments, so this is what we're going to discuss here, that there are 3 areas in particular that are involved in post-traumatic stress disorder. The amygdala, which orchestrates emotion, the prefrontal cortex, which regulates the amygdala and regulates response to emotional stimuli, and the hippocampus, which stores memory. And hippocampus is shut off in part by post-traumatic stress disorders, and that is thought to account for some of the misplacements of memory and distortions of memory that occurs. Also, there is evidence for genetic participation in this. If you have an identical twin that has post-traumatic stress disorder, the likelihood of you getting post-traumatic stress disorder is much greater than if you had a twin who was not identical. Post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't simply occur as a result of war. It also occurs in civilian life. And interestingly, there, women are much more susceptible to post-traumatic stress disorder than men because they're more susceptible to sexual abuse, physical violence. But in addition to just physical brutality, there are other things that can contribute to post-traumatic stress disorder. Natural disasters, things like 9/11, hurricanes and storms can all trigger, particularly if people are in an awkward situation relationship, can trigger post-traumatic stress disorder. The symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, in addition to helplessness, have other features: nightmares, recurrent bad ideas, bad frightening thoughts, a tendency to avoid the situation that in any way recalls it. So this is really a very, very painful experience. Although we've only considered this as a diagnostic category for 30 years, it's amazing how much we know about the biology of this. Charles Darwin realized that we convey emotions through our faces and was very much interested in the expression of emotion. And he pointed out that emotions are amazingly conserved among different people. So if you go through people all over the world, they express the same 6 or 7 prototypic emotions, and they express it with the same facial features. So you see, for example, sadness on the left and happiness on the right, and this is pretty universal. Not only that, he realized profoundly that it's evolutionarily conserved in simple animals. This is a complex animal, the orangutan, but even mice and rats show emotional responses very similar to that of humans. And Darwin shows this picture of a human being and an orangutan showing a very similar response to emotion. And the reason this is so powerful is that many people have been influenced by Darwin's realization about the conservation of behavior and emotional response, and use simple animals, as we're going to hear about this afternoon, to study post-traumatic stress disorder, which you can produce rather readily in mice and in rats. And there we can learn about the genetics of it, we can learn about the neural systems that are involved, and amazingly, we can also get some insights into treatments that could reverse it in animals that can then be applied to people. So we're going to hear a number of different approaches to trying to help people with post-traumatic stress disorders. Psychotherapy, group therapy, as well as things that have come, pharmacotherapy that has come out of animals. So this is really a remarkable disorder in which not only do we have a very, very good understanding of what causes it, but we're beginning to get some insight into how to treat it. So we're in for a very exciting discussion because these are the people that have pioneered it, and JoAnn is the person who's experienced it.
Okay, let me.
I like this last point that Lisa made. We have an amazingly good understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder, in part because it feeds into the biology of emotion, which we understand well. But I think this is the tip of the iceberg. I don't think these 3 structures explain the whole sort of, if you will, neural circuit of the emotional response to a stressful stimulus. And this is a disorder in which one could work this out. And would give us tremendous insight into how a psychiatric disease is really established in the brain. And since there's so much overlap, there's overlap between this disorder and panic disorder, there's overlap between this disorder and drug addiction. So if we get profound insight into this disease, it'll help us understanding other psychiatric diseases.
Is this, of all the things, of the many things that we have studied on this program, all the episodes that we have gone through over 2 years, one of those cases where cognitive therapy can play a significant role?
Absolutely. cognitive therapy has been a revolution in psychotherapy because it brought a different approach, not insights, but understanding cognitive style. And two, Aaron Beck from the very beginning did outcome studies. Yeah. He didn't just say, I know the patient is getting better because I sense he's getting better, but be showing this is better than placebo, it's better than selective serotonin uptake inhibitors, to show solid evidence. And this is why cognitive behavior therapy is reimbursed in the British healthcare system, while many other forms of therapy are not.
But not here?
Here it's vaguer.
Vaguer, not so well.
Not so well, yeah.
All right, so next time we are going to sum up science and government, huh?
You'll handle government, I'll try to handle science.
No. Tell the audience about
the impact of neuroscience on public policy is enormous. Witnesses in court, how reliable is their testimony? What have we learned about child development that can predict outcome, delay of gratification, and other kinds of things like this? How reliable is intuitive judgment? Many things that have come out of neurobiology that have affected public policy, and we'll have a very good time discussing it.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you.